There are a lot of excellent villains in Middle-earth. The abhorrent evil spirit of Sauron, the primal terror of Shelob, the twisted cruelty of Saruman. But most of the villains that we see aren't human. It takes a special kind of evil to turn a human being into an antagonist, and yet Tolkien tackles this complex idea in the character of Denethor. Denethor is a man put into a nearly impossible situation. He's wise enough to know the danger that he's in, but he's too wise to trust in hope. He plays the role of tragic antagonist with such adept nuance, but unfortunately a lot of that nuance was lost in the Peter Jackson film adaptations. In fact, while I think that you could argue that the Denethor of the books wasn't really a villain, I would say that the Denethor of the movies is purely villainous. Today, I want to discuss the character of Denethor as it is presented in the books and the movies, to try and figure out why so much of what made this character so special was lost in adaptation. Before we even meet Denethor, we are warned that he is different. First off, he's not even a king. Although his family has ruled over Gondor for nearly 1,000 years, they are given the title of steward and not king. They are seen as guarding Gondor, guarding the throne, in preparation for the return of the rightful king. But, as Gandalf explains, it's not just Denethor's title that sets him apart from the other kings of men like Theoden. Theoden is a kindly old man. Denethor is of another sort. Proud and subtle, a man of far greater lineage and power, though he is not called king. This comparison is hammered home by their names, which share a lot of similar sounds, Theoden, Denethor, but they're these imperfect inverses of each other, just as they are shattered, broken reflections of each other. Denethor has all the trappings of a king, the noble lineage, the wealth, the city, but he is not king. Theoden lives in a hall of wood and tends to horses, and yet he is more of a king than Denethor could ever hope to be. Throughout The Lord of the Rings, there is this emphasis on lineage, on knowing who you are and where you came from. And if you want to learn a little bit about your lineage and where you came from, you can check out this video's sponsor, MyHeritage. MyHeritage is a global family history and DNA service that's going to make exploring your family history easier than ever. Their kits are incredibly easy to use. You just have to take a quick cheek swab, it takes less than 2 minutes, and then you can ship your kit back to them and get your results. And don't worry, in their privacy policy, MyHeritage has committed to never selling or licensing your genetic data, so it'll be perfectly safe with them. Now, what this kit does is it's going to break down the percentage of my origins from across the world. Now, I am predicting that my results will be almost entirely European, but I'm really excited to get the breakdown of where in Europe. But while we're waiting on my results, I thought we would give their photo restoration features a try. So here we have a photo of my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother. So let's give their enhance feature a try. Okay. So it gives you a slider for the before and after. And then with that photo looking a little sharper, let's also give the colorizing a try. Oh, whoa. Oh, that's cool. Oh, look at that! All right, and now is the time. My results are in, and I'm very excited about this. I have always wanted to do this. Drum roll, please. Okay, so it's 72% North and West European, 21.8% East European. There we go, 5% English. Yeah. So that's me, as anticipated, entirely European. So they made a special shout out to the Mennonites in Lancaster and Lebanon, which is where my extended family is from, so that makes a lot of sense. Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Germans in East Pennsylvania. Yeah, that makes absolute sense considering what I know about my family. We've got all these lovely little circles here. And it gives you a ton of information. You can also go to DNA matches. I'm not going to show you who they are, obviously, because that's relatively invasive, but... And then this is, I believe, based on the initials, is my aunt. which makes sense because she's also gotten one of these DNA tests done. That is exciting. My dad is a huge family history nerd, so I'm super excited to share that data with him. Now, if you want to give MyHeritage a try, they have a promotion going right now. Click the link in the description or use the QR code right here, along with my coupon code to get free shipping. From the very outset of his character, Denethor is grave and grand, far larger than life. Suddenly Pippin was reminded of the hewn rocks of Argonath, and awe fell on him as he looked down that avenue of kings long dead. At the far end of the dais of many steps was set a high throne under a canopy of marble shaped like a crowned helm. Behind it was carved upon the wall and set with gems an image of a tree in flower, but the throne was empty. At the foot of the dais, upon the lowest step, which was broad and deep, there was a stone chair, black and unadorned, and on it sat an old man gazing at his lap. In his hand was a white rod with a golden knob. He did not look up. When we meet Denethor in The Return of the King, it is towards the end of his character arc. He is the next successor in a long line of stewards, chained in by the pressure to live out their legacy. The power of Mordor grows stronger by the day, and this last major stronghold of men is more in danger of collapsing than ever before. But when Gandalf and Pippin arrive to help, Denethor is only interested in reopening the wounds of Boromir's death. He asks after his son immediately, and when a guilt-ridden Pippin swears his fealty to Denethor, the first thing that Denethor asks of him after he's sworn his fealty is to tell the story of Boromir's death. Despite Gandalf's efforts to discuss the true purpose of their visit, Denethor is completely uninterested. He believes that he already knows all that there is to know about the threat from the east. But I know already sufficient of these deeds for my own counsel against the menace of the east. He turned his dark eyes on Gandalf, and now Pippin saw a likeness between the two of them. And he felt the strain between them, almost as if he saw a line of smoldering fire drawn from eye to eye that might suddenly burst into flame. Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful, and older. It is no light matter that Pippin sees Denethor as more lordly, more old than Gandalf, especially Gandalf the White. Gandalf is a wizard, a Maya, meaning that his spirit has been around since creation. He watched the stars in the abyss be sung to life. He is unspeakably powerful, older than the foundations of the earth, and yet Denethor, at the foot of the throne in a stone chair, manages to appear more lordly. Tolkien seemed to believe that humans were in possession of some very special traits. While elves were the firstborn, they were beautiful and immortal, there were still special gifts that humans had. Wizards were powerful and lordly and ancient, and yet this human mortal steward could outclass them. The evils of Middle-earth were many and terrifying, and yet some of the greatest atrocities committed in Arda were committed by human beings. No story captures this better than the Akalabeth, or the downfall of Numenor. Long before the Kingdom of Gondor was ever even founded, the men who were brave enough to help the elves fight and defeat evil were given a great gift, the island kingdom of Numenor. Safe from the perils of Middle-earth, these humans flourished, learning crafting and lore from the elves, living long lives, amassing wealth, and becoming like gods to the men who were left behind. Therefore they grew wise and glorious, and in all things more like to the firstborn than any other of the kindreds of men. And they were tall, taller than the tallest sons of Middle-earth, and the light of their eyes was like the bright stars. Despite all this glory, the kingdom of Numenor could not stand forever. It started quietly, with men asking the elves questions. questions about why they died and elves did not, questions about why they had been forbidden to pass over to Valinor, where the elves dwelled with the Valar in peace and harmony. Over decades, this wounded pride festered until, with the influence of Sauron, the Numenorians broke the one rule that had been put in place and invaded Valinor with an army. Retribution was swift. A great wave rose up and destroyed the island, and nearly every soul was lost to fire, brimstone, and the rushing water. I say nearly every soul because there were some Numenorians, some faithful Numenorians, who escaped, and they would go to Middle-earth and found the kingdom of Gondor. It is this Numenorian blood, for better and worse, that flows through the Stewards. Tolkien wrote, I imagine that Numenorians, before their knowledge dwindled, knew more about heredity than other people. They recognized the fact that, in spite of intermarriages, some characteristics would appear in pure form in later generations. Aragorn's own longevity was a case in point. Gandalf, I think, refers to the curious fact that even in the much less well-preserved house of the Stewards, Denethor had come out as almost purely Numenorian. Gandalf explains to Pippin that Denethor's pure Numenorian blood makes him more noble, perhaps, but also more prideful. He has long sight. He can perceive, if he bends his will thither, much of what is passing in the minds of men, even of those that dwell far off. It is difficult to deceive him, and dangerous to try. If Denethor had one fatal flaw, it would probably be that he knew too much, and that he always needed to know more. Beyond his Numenorian kind of superpowers of perception, he had also dared to gaze into the Palantir of the White Tower. A Palantir is a powerful tool of communication, a stone which, when gazed into, can allow you to see across vast distances, even across enemy lines. And Denethor, fearful of the growing power of Mordor, had used the Palantir to look east. In this way, Denethor gained his great knowledge of things that passed in his realm and far beyond his borders. But he bought the knowledge dearly, being aged before his time by his contest with the will of Sauron. The problem with the Palantiri is that although you can use them to see, people can also use them to look back. Although Denethor had gotten to know Sauron, gotten to know the heart of his plans and schemes, Sauron had also gotten to know Denethor, worming his way into his heart, just like the Numenorian lords of old. Denethor's Numenorian pride, his self-destructive thirst for knowledge, is at the very heart of his character, and yet a lot of these things are lacking from the Peter Jackson film. They never bring up his Numenorian blood, and even if they did, we would have no context for what that means provided in the film. And although we see that the White Tower has a Palantir in the extended edition, we never even see Denethor use it. In the books, when Denethor refuses Gandalf's help, it is sort of a well-founded denial. He can see what is going on, even if his fear is being manipulated by Sauron, and in the books there is an emphasis put on just how conniving Gandalf can be. Gandalf is well known for always telling half-truths, never outright lying, but often obscuring the truth in order to twist things to his purposes. We, as the readers, obviously know that Gandalf does want what is best for Middle-earth, but I can easily see how, in-universe, it would be very difficult to work with him as an equal. Denethor admits that he probably should accept the advice of Gandalf, but that is a very difficult pill to swallow, especially for someone so proud. Pride would be folly that disdained help and counsel at need, but you deal out such gifts according to your own designs. Yet the Lord of Gondor is not to be made the tool of other men's purposes, however worthy. Because in the movies we don't have the context of Denethor's use of the Palantir or Gandalf's tendency towards manipulation, Denethor's refusal of the help comes across as grief-inspired madness rather than misguided reason. I think the main issue with Denethor's character in the movie is that he simply did not have enough time. In the book, we have pages and pages of dialogue with him, entire conversations where we can explore his complex relationship to the ruling of Gondor, the very specific type of despair that he has sunk into. But in the movies, where he has maybe 20 or 30 minutes of screen time, they had to drain a lot of the depth from his character. I think one of the biggest misses is in his relationship with Faramir. In the books, it is clear from the very beginning that Faramir is not his favorite son. Boromir is brave, strong in battle, and maybe a little bit hard-headed. Faramir, however, is more thoughtful, measured, and wise. And also, he has become quite close with Gandalf over the years, learning a lot from him about lore and history. Those are admirable qualities nowadays, but those aren't exactly the qualities you hear praised in Beowulf or other great epics from history. They were not the kind of traits that Denethor respected, especially considering his distaste for Gandalf's influence. Yet, it is Faramir's wisdom and patience that earns him an invitation to the Council of Elrond. He receives this invitation in a dream in which he watches a great wave swallow the land up in a shadow of the Numenorian fall. In this dream, he also heard a prophecy speaking of Rivendell, doom, and the importance of a halfling. This dream actually came to Faramir on multiple occasions, but it wasn't until Boromir, the favored son, had this dream that Denethor took it seriously. He chose the more heroic of his two sons to send off to the Council of Elrond, and Boromir left Gondor one last time. Honestly, who could say what would have happened if Faramir had joined the Fellowship instead of his brother? He was able to resist the pull of the ring later on, so it is entirely possible that he would have remained faithful to the Fellowship in the way that Boromir could not. Either way, if Faramir had been in Boromir's place, Boromir would still be alive. It was Denethor's unreasonable preference, his doubt in Faramir, that got Boromir killed, and that is not a fact that either of them are likely to forget anytime soon. When Faramir makes the decision that Boromir could not, and sends Frodo and the ring away instead of taking him back to Gondor, this seems to be the final straw in the relationship between Faramir and Denethor. "Do you wish then," said Faramir, "that our places had been exchanged?" "Yes, I wish that indeed," said Denethor. "For Boromir was loyal to me, and no wizard's pupil. He would have remembered his father's need, and would not have squandered what fortune gave. He would have brought me a mighty gift." For a moment, Faramir's restraint gave way. "I would ask you, my father, to remember why it was that I, not he, was in Ithilien. On one occasion, at least, your counsel has prevailed not long ago. It was the lord of the city that gave the errand to him." "Stir not the bitterness in the cup that I mixed for myself," said Denethor. "Have I not tasted it now, many nights upon my tongue, foreboding that worse yet lay in the dregs? As now indeed I find. Would it were not so. Would that this thing had come to me!" Denethor is well aware of the mistakes that he has made, but his pride turns that pain into pure despair. I think the problem is that Denethor, as much as he preferred Boromir's boldness and bravery, he was much more like Faramir. But every admirable quality that we recognize in Faramir is something that Denethor hates in himself. This is such a deeply rooted agony. It's something that he is so afraid to face that he sends Faramir off to defend Osgiliath, even knowing that it is incredibly dangerous. Inadequacy seems to be the central wound of Denethor's character. He will never be Boromir. He will never sit on a throne. It is his destiny to forever remain behind the scenes, never quite being the hero, and he takes this pain out on his second son, who seems to handle what the world has given him with much more grace than Denethor could ever muster. In the movies, this through line is not nearly as complete. At least the extended editions probably give us my favorite extended scene, which is this scene where Boromir and Faramir are celebrating a victory, and Denethor arrives and sends Boromir out after the ring. Unfortunately, this scene, which is kind of the tiny scrap we get of context, isn't even in the theatrical cut, and I think we lose a lot of the why Denethor and Faramir clash so hard. Both stories do give us some semblance of this line.
Ever you desire to appear lordly and gracious as a king of old.
In the movies, this comes across as a cheap shot, as an attack. In the books, though, we have enough context to know just how much Denethor is projecting here. Faramir isn't posing as lordly and righteous, he's not striving to be king, he is just a good person doing what is right. Denethor is the one with the throne and the lordliness, who Pippin mistakes as being more ancient than Gandalf. He is the one who desperately wishes to be seen as the king. Faramir, in his simplicity of action, his wholehearted pursuit of what is right, ends up being more kingly than Denethor could ever hope to be. Denethor tried to play the game, to outwit the enemy, and ends up rotting from the inside out. Tolkien wrote, Denethor was tainted with mere politics, hence his failure and his mistrust of Faramir. It had become for him a primary motive to preserve the polity of Gondor, as it was against another potentate who had made himself stronger and was to be feared and opposed for that reason, rather than because he was ruthless and wicked. Rather than valuing the real things of this world, love, freedom, human life, Denethor fell into the trap of politics, preferring stasis over healthy progression. When Gandalf asks him what his true goal is, Denethor admits, I would have things as they were in all the days of my life, answered Denethor, and in the days of my long fathers before me, to be lord of the city in peace and leave my chair to a son after me, who would be his own master and no wizard's pupil. Denethor is trying his hardest to swim against a tsunami. Boromir is dead. The throne cannot go to him. The king is coming back. The time of the stewards is drawing to a close, and Sauron is on the move. He cannot simply bury his head in the sand and hold onto his political power. In the end, what breaks Denethor is seeing his son, who he does love, even if their relationship is complicated, return to him wounded to the point of near death on the orders of the steward. The armies of Mordor have come, his bloodline is dying, and his careful political control has been completely lost. Battle is vain. Why should we wish to live longer? Why should we not go to death side by side? Authority is not given to you, Steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death, answered Gandalf. And only the heathen kings, under the domination of the Dark Power, did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair. Pride and despair? Denethor cried. Didst thou think that the eyes of the White Tower were blind? Nay, I have seen more than thou knowest, grey fool, for thy hope is but ignorance. Go then, and labor in healing. Go forth and fight! Vanity! For a little space you may triumph on the field for a day, but against the power that now arises there is no victory. To this city only the first finger of its hand has yet been stretched. All the east is moving, and even now the wind of thy hope cheats thee, and wafts up Anduin a fleet with black sails. The west has failed. Denethor has built his entire sense of self in knowing, in being in charge, being one step ahead. Hollow pride is the only thing keeping him from sinking into the mires of insufficiency. But now, with defeat at hand and all of his plans failed, Denethor has nothing left in him to trust in hope, luck, or divine intervention. Denethor of the movies is a representation of the madness brought on by despair. Denethor of the books is a representation of the despair brought on by pride, a despair which, from the outside, looks an awful lot like madness. Denethor of the books is not mad. He is quite technically seeing clearer than anyone, his vision not blurred by fanciful things like hope or faith. But in the faith-driven world of Tolkien, this proves to be the greatest mistake of all. This is what sets him apart from Theoden and Gandalf. They have true grandeur, brought to life by their hope and faith in the divine. The message of movie Denethor is quite simple. A man's mind is easily broken by pain and pressure. The message of the books could not be more complex. It holds a painful mirror to many of the ideals of modern politics, to the dangers of foresight and the pitfall of self-reliance. This comes to a head in the character's conclusion. In the movies, it's a spectacular scene. As Denethor is engulfed by the inferno, he sweeps out the door, and we see this stunning wide shot of him hurtling off of the spur of Minas Tirith. It's the ideal death for a madman and a fool, satisfying in its certainty. In the book, there's not nearly such a spectacle. Then Denethor leaped upon the table, and standing there wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of his stewardship that lay at his feet, and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the Palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had great strength of will to turn it to other purpose, he saw only 2 aged hands withering in flame. Gandalf, in grief and horror, turned his face away and closed the door. For a while he stood in thought, silent upon the threshold, while those outside heard the greedy roaring of the fire within. And then Denethor gave a cry, and afterward spoke no more, nor was ever again seen by mortal men. So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion, said Gandalf. Denethor of the books dies as a complete deconstruction of everything that he ever was. The staff of stewardship is broken, the Palantir rendered almost completely unusable. He will remain in the crypts of Minas Tirith alone, a burned husk, a permanent memorial to the dangers of self-reliance and pride. The hamartia of Denethor is one that we see everywhere in the modern world. Tom Shippey suggests that he might be interpreted as the voices during the Cold War that claimed better dead than red. Denethor thought that if he could not have the world perfectly as he wanted it around him, it would be better to have the entire thing go down in flames. He forgot that there were other people, other forces at work in the grand scheme of things. To me, Denethor's story is the perfect tragedy for the modern world. Despite being very modern in its themings, it carries the taste of tragedy that has plagued art since its earliest days. The filicide of the King Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter to the winds of war. The bottomless despair in the face of battle displayed by many Shakespearean heroes and anti-heroes. When faced with the consequences of his actions in the form of an invading army, Macbeth laments, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death." Does that not ring similar to, against the power that now arises, there is no victory, the West has failed? We see the depth of agony, the scope, the drama of an ancient tragedy. But the strings of fate have been put into place by the folly of a politician who thought he could be a perfect politician forever. I think, if anything, comparing book Denethor and movie Denethor goes to show how important it is to give even evil characters non-evil depth. The actual actions of these two versions of Denethor aren't all that different, but it is the pathos lent by the book, our understanding of his heritage, his complex relationship with his sons, his very human pride that allows us to truly feel the impact of his death. It is satisfying to watch a madman get his due, but it is cathartic to watch a man who thought that he knew everything come to face the fact that there are powers at work that are stronger, more powerful, and wiser than he could ever dream to be. I say it in every one of these videos, but you really cannot overstate just how much changing the medium of a piece of art changes what that art is capable of. There just was not the time or space in the Return of the King film to shape Denethor in the same way that they did in the book. I will say that there were definitely some small things they could have done that would have gone a long way. Just some shots of Denethor with the Palantir, or including Faramir's dream, but I've watched enough people watch these movies to know that the character of Denethor that they created is quite effective in the context of the movie. He's cruel, infuriating, and really bad at eating tomatoes. For an action movie that is in the third act of the third film, he makes a great antagonist. I think we just have to face the fact that Denethor lives on in the books, where he was originally created, where he was best written, and I think that is a beautiful thing. But I do feel that Denethor's character in the books is really underrated. I wasn't even able to get down every aspect of his character in this video, so please let me know in the comments what I missed. If you enjoyed this video or it got you thinking, consider giving the video a like because that really helps me out. And if you want to stick around every week to hear me talk about The Lord of the Rings and any other stuff that I like, consider subscribing to join our little community. Thank you so much to my Patreons for your ongoing support, and to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video and helping me learn a little bit more about myself. Be sure to check them out with the link in my description, and if you do give them a try, please report back in the comments of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.